Are you seeing it now?
And it's just coming into presentation mode. There we go. Great.
Okay, perfect. And apologies, everyone. So this, Harry, this is the series Nurses Leading the Path to COP30. And you can view past recordings on our learning site, and I'll pop the link in the chat later on in the presentation. So just to give you an overview of our objectives, we have two global leaders on the call today, nurse global leaders here to share perspectives, personal perspectives, but also their perspectives as nurse leaders within global nursing organizations. And so we're really trying to hone in on how talking about the local actions that nurses do, but how that catapults into this collective action for climate solutions and planetary health. And so first, I'm thrilled to introduce our first speaker, who has been a long time friend of Annie and has partnered with us on a number of climate and health initiatives. So Erica Burton, who is the Senior Policy Advisor with the International Council of Nurses. Erica is a registered nurse and certified global nurse consultant with 14 years of experience in public health, global health, and nursing policy, and is dedicated to developing and promoting evidence-based, ethical, people-centered global health policy, strategies, and care. Erica has served as the Senior Policy Advisor on ICN's Nursing and Health Policy team since 2015. In this role, she has worked to develop ICN policy on a wide range of issues, and that includes climate change. So with that, I'm just going to do a little switch here of slide presentations, and I'll pull up her slides, and then I will turn it over to you, Erica. Sorry.
Okay. I will just say hello while you're doing that. It's so nice to be here. As Kara said, I worked with Annie for a number of years in my role at ICN. My colleague now holds the climate and health portfolio, but I still pop in once in a while, which I'm so pleased to do. I will start with a land acknowledgement actually while we're getting this going. I think it's highly relevant always, but is very relevant to this topic. I see that someone's having audio issues. Does everybody, Kara, can you hear me? You can? Okay, good. So I'm located in Toronto, Takaronto, which is now known as Toronto. And in Mohawk, that means where there are trees standing in the water. Today it's covered by Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties. It's also the traditional territories of many First Peoples, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. So these First Peoples have been and are the stewards of this land long before us. And when I speak from this land, it's important to acknowledge that these nations continue to experience ongoing colonization and displacements, where these land acknowledgements that I just delivered are offered in place of the land itself that belongs to these First Peoples. I think that starts us off very nicely to then recognize our shared responsibility, which is something that I'm going to talk a lot about in the next few minutes, to make sure that this sacred lands remains healthy and intact as people who now work and live and play and grow on this land. Do you want me to try to share my screen and see if that works, Kara? I only see the previous presentation.
Oh, do you do? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Do you want to try Erica while I'm fiddling?
Yeah. We're all having tech issues, and it might be because the soaring temperatures. I assume that many of you are located in the US and North America, and I'm sure you have super high temps like we do. We had Fahrenheit, I think it converts to 111 degrees the other day, which is 47 degrees in Toronto. It continued for 3-4 days. Finally, today it's 38 instead of 47. So super relevant to what we're talking about today. Let's see if this works. Do you see that now?
Yes, it works
And what
perfect.
if I
Yeah.
put it on this view? Does that
Yeah,
work?
looks great.
Okay. Um, right. Did it disappear?
It did.
Oh no. Okay. How about that?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. So as Kara said, I work for ICN. I'm the senior policy advisor there for almost a decade. And ICN has had I guess I'll first of all make sure that everyone knows who we are, if you don't. So we're the Global Voice of Nursing. We're a member organization. We're now actually at 140 plus members, so representing 30 million nurses worldwide. We're all across the globe. We had about 10 new members join in the last year, so that's very exciting. We work on a number of issues, and one of them being climate and health and planetary health. Just make sure that this is working. Okay. So I assume that most of you on this call know that climate change is considered the single greatest health threat facing humanity. Um, and that there's this really growing and very powerful body of evidence that shows that these health harms are increasing in severity, they're increasing in scope, and that's not only having an impact on the planet itself, but also on these health equalities. And of course, ICN is in the business of working on these big global health inequalities as the main global voice for nurses. There's multiple connections between climate and health, which we all know and are, I think, very acutely aware of. But also now more and more, nursing practice itself is increasingly impacted. So we as nurses are being influenced and impacted in our day-to-day practice. Our own health is impacted, the communities that we live in, our families. And so because we're this, very trusted group of people who are the biggest group of health providers, we are critical climate actors. I probably don't have to say that on this webinar, but just just to make that point extremely clear. And one of the things that is really underpinning ICN's work on climate and health and planetary health is that it's actually written in our code of ethics. So nurses actually have a critical ethical duty to advocate for climate health because of that direct and indirect impact on public health. We are actually, because of our role, put at the intersection of patient care and also these broader societal issues. So this actually puts us in a really unique position to contribute to climate action in a lot of ways. So this ethical duty is written in the 2021 version of the ICN Code of Ethics. It's under number 4, which is Nurses in Global Health. And it states that nurses collaborate in practice to preserve, sustain, and protect the natural environment and are aware of the health consequences of environmental degradation, i.e. climate change. They advocate for initiatives that reduce environmentally harmful practices to promote health and well-being. And then if you were to look at the code, it looks like how, if you go further down, you can see how we actually act on those things. So it's broken down into 3 categories: nurses and nurse leaders, nurse managers, educators and researchers, and national nurse associations. So nurses can serve, as you can see, it's as educators, both in like a formal educator role, but also in a non-educator role, still as an educator. So that looks like raising awareness about climate change and its impact on health, educating your patients, their families, communities about these risks, how to be sustainable. We also can really help empower individuals. There's a lot of what we know as eco-anxiety, people not knowing what they can do and how their actions can make a difference, both your patients and your colleagues as nurses. And so leaders both at the top and on the front lines can be these really powerful, empowering role models. So a little bit about ICN's work in this area and sort of where we started and where we've come. So first in 2018 was the very first time that we released our position statement, calling for increased nursing leadership to combat the rising effects of climate on health. So we first then called on members of the health community to make climate action a priority. And other groups were already doing this. We, although are not the first, we're also not the last. So 2018, lots has happened since then, as you know. In 2024, just October of last year, we updated the position statement. And that's just to reflect some of the changing information and changing evidence and positions. It's definitely a more powerful position statement than the 2018 version, although I think that the 2018 version was extremely strong. We really hit the ground running with this. And it describes, first and foremost, why nurses should be interested in climate action, which I think for a lot of our members, 140 across the globe, some of them had no idea why this was relevant to them. Some of them maybe knew why it was relevant, but didn't know what to do. And then, of course, there were those national nursing associations in countries that had really kind of advanced agendas in climate and planetary health, and they knew exactly what to do, but this gave them the basis and the evidence and the policy paper to say, here is what ICN is saying across the globe as well. So these statements are really, really important pieces of policy. We're very, very happy to have them, and we're very happy that they get stronger each year. So just some of the top lines from these statements. Of course, it's an important opportunity to harness the significant health co-benefits of climate change mitigation and adaptation policies. So looking at why does climate action help us from a health perspective? The fact that it's a shared responsibility of ours to sustain and protect the natural environment from depletion, from pollution, degradation, and destruction. We know that as a health community and as nurses, we have this big leadership power. We have integrity. And this is really paramount to harnessing to accelerate that health-centered climate action. There's 30 plus million of us. So what a power that is. To me, it only really makes sense to harness that. And then we really stand by the fact that to prevent these worsening climate change impacts and to promote planetary health, that nurses really do need these skills. So not just to know about it, but also really need to be armed with the skills and competencies to be able to advocate for effective climate policies and environmental health policies. And that's not always easy. That doesn't come naturally. Was often not in undergrad education. It's often not in continuing professional development in many, many, many areas in the world. So this is something that, while in North America, we might think, oh, we've seen a lot of that over the last years. For many of our members around the world, that just is not there yet. So this is something that we're continuing to do, and why I mention it, despite our probably deep knowledge amongst the participants of this webinar. And so when we're looking at it from the ground, from our frontline nurses, ICN stands by nurses in all of their roles. So in your role as a clinician, as an educator, a researcher, a policy influencer, and executive, we think you can and you should educate yourself, educate your peers, educate new nurses, the next generation of nurses, nursing students, about these impacts. Engage in multidisciplinary advocacy. So we talk a lot in our nursing bubble. This is one of those topics that we need to talk outside of our bubble, of course, and there's a strength in that. And I think that this is one of these topics that requires us to learn how to do that better. Otherwise, we might be a little bit lost in this because we weren't the first experts. Hopefully we will be eventually. And then transforming the public narrative on climate change. And I think we saw a lot of that happen over the years of COP, which I'll talk about in a sec. Advocating for policies that promote the reduction of healthcare waste, ensuring waste management. And then, as I mentioned earlier, empowering people, their families, their communities to make these climate-related healthy lifestyle choices. So what has ICN done other than take a position and promote it? We've done a lot of stuff over the last 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 years. The first thing that I wanted to talk about was our very recent publication. So this was on planetary health. It was authored by Teddy Potter, Barbara Astle, Heidi Rogers, and myself. Many of you know Teddy, Barbara, and Heidi, I can imagine. We worked over the last year or so to get this into what we're calling a topic brief. So for ICN, the topic brief has the ability to give a little bit more of that background. As I said, for this, for our audience, not a lot of people will be familiar with planetary health. I wasn't as familiar as I, should have been, or definitely after supporting this statement, am now. And so before we start pushing these policy recommendations in a position statement, we've opened up the topic with this topic brief. I encourage you to go find it on the website. It's really great. It goes through some of the issues that are directly relevant to nurses. And just like a quick nod to planetary health, in case some of you are not familiar with what that concept is. It's the Rockefeller Foundation and the Lancet Commission introduced this as a concept. It's a solutions-oriented, sort of transdisciplinary field and also social movement. And it looks at how human behavior is directly degrading Earth's natural systems. So it's bigger than climate change, and it looks at the fact that planetary health, the health of the planet, is not just climate change, but it's actually driven by a number of ecological drivers. So pollution of air, pollution of the land, of water, resource scarcity, biodiversity loss, and deforestation. Up on the screen, a number of little excerpts that I grabbed from this topic brief. Essentially, it's encouraging nurses to adopt a planetary health lens, and why we think that that's important, and how we can do that. What I really like about the fourth bullet, and I'm looking at this screen because it's on both screens here, is developing deep practices in meaningfully engaging to self and others with the environment to advance ecological respect, healing, environmental and planetary health, environmental stewardship, and justice. I really like those words. I think as a nurse, they really resonate with me. When you're hearing, fossil fuels and 1.5 Celsius and all this, those words might not resonate. So I am of the mind that we should be using words that are more resonating and connecting us to then those bigger concepts of phasing out fossil fuels and coal and all that. So I really enjoy this planetary health lens, and I encourage you to deep dive into this if you haven't already. With this, perfect example, really great example of advocacy. We have at ICN what's called the ICN Alliance of Student and Early Career Nurses. And this is a brand new body that ICN created about a year ago. And it is the first and the global voice for students and early career nurses. And so they actually put out a statement on behalf of our previous nursing student steering group and our current alliance. And it was really, really powerful. It was actually picked up by a number of news outlets and a number of nursing journals, particularly in Europe. And it's the students themselves, most of them were students, some of them early career nurses. They're mostly all working in, hospital settings or community settings. And this was an avenue for them to be able to share their voice and their perspective on planetary health and climate change. And they echoed the things that we're saying, essentially, but that student and early career nurses should be recognized as essential contributors to advancing planetary health, that planetary health should be a core component in nursing education, and that the nursing curricula of today should reflect the realities of this climate crisis, and prepare future nurses to advocate for sustainable, equitable, and climate resilient health systems across all areas of practice. And I put a quote at the bottom. They offer their perspective as the future of nursing. And I think we will come back to that time and time again in this area of work, because many of us not nursing and not interested in climate change are thinking about now, and not thinking about then. And unfortunately, the then is very close. And so to have this hope for this future from this future group, I think is really inspiring. We partnered with the Global Climate and Health Alliance. You'll all be familiar, most of you will be familiar with this group. It's a global network of over 200 organizations spanning every continent. It represents more than 46 million health workers. Of course, you can imagine that the majority of those are nurses, because ICN is a member. Again, just showing the power of us being involved in these efforts. Through our partnership with GCHA, ICN has been able to do a number of activities, and we deeply appreciate and respect this partnership. It allowed us to sit on the WHO Civil Society Working Group to advance action on climate and change in health. And we were one of the first organizations to sit on this group. It has a rotational basis, so we're back on it again. And that has allowed us to participate in a lot of the activities that the WHO has been doing and COP has been doing. We also, the other little clip up there is a climate prescription that we did. It was a short film. It had testimonials and calls to action from on the ground frontline health workers who are witnessing climate change health impacts with their patients. And actually, it was a call to world leaders that they then showed at COP, which I'll tell you about in a sec. Another thing, another example of very strong advocacy that ICN brings when it comes to climate change and health is our participation at the World Health Assembly. So the first health professional organization to be recognized as in official relations with the WHO has allowed us to contribute to their governance structures, so the World Health Assembly. And so every year we are invited to participate, and we can make statements amongst the member states as well. And over a number of years, we have intervened on climate-related agenda items. And in 2024, last year, there was a very important resolution that was passed on climate change and health, which many of you will be familiar with. And so that's one example of that advocacy that we it's a 300-word, sometimes reduced to 200-word, short, snappy, powerful statement that's made and delivered to health ministers in 194 of the member states. So another example of powerful advocacy. I'm just aware of the time, so I'm gonna, I think, I don't know, Kara, if you can give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. I'm not sure when we started because we started a bit late. please cut me off if I'm over my time. But just a little quick journey through our COP. We started off in COP26. Of course, the UK COP26 presidency was the first to frame and recognize the importance of the health dimensions of climate change. And there was a health pavilion hosted by the WHO. So we actually partnered with Annie, and we had a fantastic webinar that was live streamed into Glasgow about nursing leadership at the intersection of climate and health. We also signed up to the Healthy Climate Prescription message, which was delivered to COP26. And that was, an open letter calling on national leaders for real action. Then at COP27, ICN signed the petition calling for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. And so the letter calls on governments of the world to develop and implement this treaty, and it actually wants it to be laid out in a legally binding global plan. And then the key messages are there up on the screen. So to end the expansion of any new fossil fuel infrastructure and production, phase out existing production of fossil fuels in an equitable manner, and then fast track real solutions and ensure a just transition. Our COP28 activities were very exciting. We had our president of the Emirates Nursing Association, Dr. Sumaya Mohammed Ablushi, and she actually attended in person at that first COP28 health day. So that was the first time COP ever had a health day. And her quote there is up on the screen. It was fantastic to have a member of our National Nursing Association leadership at one of the COPs. We also at this COP joined WHO and other health organizations to call on to urgently implement the already agreed on action. It was called Uniting for Health and Climate Actions. And so it called on governments to raise their ambitions, raise the targets. And so those are up on the screen as well. And then finally at COP29, we released this updated position statement, which I described a few minutes ago. And because we're a member of GCHA, we also endorsed this joint call from the international health and climate community that was called COP29 People and Planet. But that being said, you don't have to be at COP to be influential. And I think that that is the point that this whole series is really underscoring. We have had a number of members and their members submit case studies about their actions for climate and health and for planetary health. So I just grabbed a couple of them. These are mostly showcased in our International Nurses Day kit. And so I picked three that I really liked. The first one comes from Jordan, and this was introducing disaster preparedness courses into the School of Nursing curriculum. So they aim to train nurses to actively participate in managing the impacts of disasters in Jordan. Jordan is actually located in a high risk earthquake prone area and is also really susceptible to flash floods and to landslides. And Jordan also historically provides refuge for people fleeing violence in neighboring countries. So it has had in recent times an influx of over 600,000 refugees. Now, this was published in 2019, and as you can imagine, that number is probably double, tripled by now. And so what that does is that also strains the healthcare services in this country, of course. So the University of Jordan has integrated this disaster preparedness into its undergrad and postgrad nursing programs. And at the time, it had educated 150 bachelor degree nursing students, 50 masters, and 10 PhD students. And it was a pioneering initiative for the region. And it was also particularly beneficial for nurses who were employed by international organizations that were at the time offering services to Syrian refugees. And then another great example that I really like is empowering girls for environmental conservation in Malawi. So a Malawian nurse, Benson Fury, founded something called Butu Walero, and that empowers girls in rural schools for environmental conservation by engaging them in tree planting. So this nurse went out and had this idea to change the societal mindset about how to care for trees. And so he mobilized young girls in schools, their parents, their teachers, and he started to teach them this culture of tree planting. This has been maintained and flourished over a number of years, and it allows girls to learn about forestry management, having like this culture of community tree ownership, and then generating this collaborative effort. And I think this is really nice because it showcases that economic and environmental benefit for a nurse-led initiative that is, has impact on the health sector, but is also beyond the health sector. And then the final one is in Australia, and that was Nurse Claire Lane, and she founded Save Our Supplies Australia. So this aims to tackle medical waste in hospitals, and she saw that discarded, clean and unused supplies for trivial reasons, reasons that can be avoided, was contributing like immensely to medical waste. So she thought that she had the idea to redirect these items into communities that needed it. Of course, Australia has a huge rural population that's often underserved. So instead of these medical supplies going into landfills, they were redirected. They delivered over $5 million worth of supplies also outside of the country. So to Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Cambodia, and Fiji. In Papua New Guinea, they also distributed 10,000 bottles of hand sanitizer. So these are really impactful, both in at home, because she saved 20,000 tons of medical waste, but also then supporting other communities to deliver care. So that's it for me. I'm sorry for going over. As you can see, we have so many things that we're super excited about, that I thought I could talk about in 15 minutes, but there's just so much being done, and it is being done really rapidly. So you can go to our website to find some of these documents. Also, I'll pop them in the chat in a little bit so that you can have direct links. And I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Erica. Fantastic presentation. I'm gonna transition rather than try to share my screen again, since tech is not on my side today. I'm gonna introduce our next speaker. We did have a picture of her and her title. I apologize, but I'll introduce Amy and then I'll turn it over to you, and we'll have time for questions for both Erica and Amy at the end of Amy's presentation. So I'm thrilled to introduce Amy Staley, who is an award-winning global nurse leader based in New York City and is patient care director of the Neuroscience ICU Step-Down Unit in remote telemetry program at New York Presbyterian Hospital, Weill Cornell Medical Center. Outside of the workplace, Amy is proud to represent both her patients and fellow colleagues by multiplying and amplifying the voices of the nursing profession as the United Nations Youth Representative with Sigma. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Amy. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Is everybody able to see my screen? Amazing. I got lucky with the universe today because it's definitely the heat. Thank you so much, Erica. Your presentation was absolutely amazing. I loved that project in Malawi. I have several colleagues over there and I hadn't heard of it before, and I'm really excited to, I was taking pictures. I'm really excited to share that with them after the webinar. So thanks so much for that. Nice to meet you all. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones. I see my colleague Siobhan is on here as well. Siobhan is also one of our United Nations representatives, but as Kara mentioned, I currently work as a patient care director here in New York City. So I have the privilege of hiring and managing the best nurses in the world, aside from all of you, of course. And then I also have my role as Sigma United Nations Youth Representative. So I'll tell you a little bit more later about how I stumbled into becoming a nurse leader in global health. But basically, to sum it up in less than 60 seconds, I was a new grad nurse in the right room at the right time with the right people. And by the time I had hit 3 years as a registered nurse, I had spoken in over 150 countries to advocate for a profession that I had just begun working in. And I share this with you first and foremost to remind you that, you are here today as not just another number. You're not here by accident or because you're lucky. You've earned your seat and your title as a nurse. And if you're interested in making a global impact, you too are in the right room at the right time. So hopefully many of you have heard about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but today we'll touch a little bit more on those, how they affect our profession, and what exactly we can do to advance health and protect our planet through these goals. So why now? Why does it matter now? According to the World Health Organization, between 2030 and 2050, climate change is expected to cause approximately 250,000 additional deaths per year from malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress. This, of course, impacts our practice as nurses and the patient populations that we serve, but there are many things we can do to prevent these irreversible effects through education and advocacy efforts. There are 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, and as nurses, we contribute to all of them. So these were adapted by the United Nations in 2015 as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And in addition to these 17 goals, there are 169 targets, which are sub-goals to the boxes that you see here. When we reflect on nursing, we often refer to number 3, good health and well-being, because it's specifically targeted at nursing. But we really do play a role in all of these goals, and in particular, number 13, climate action. So the frontline response, nurses respond to natural disasters such as hurricanes, health crises, and other catastrophes. One example here in New York City was Hurricane Sandy in 2012, which caused several of our hospitals to evacuate and relocate patients. Since this disaster, many hospitals have implemented disaster management programs that involve nursing representation. Education, nurses play a vital role in educating the community on climate-related health threats such as heat stroke, respiratory illnesses, asthma, and pollution-linked diseases. And then sustainability and waste reduction. So hospitals produce more than 5 million tons of waste per year, which is the equivalent to 29 pounds of waste per bed per day. According to Practice Green Health, which is a leading sustainable healthcare organization, approximately 25% of waste generated by a hospital is plastic. Nurses all over the globe are working to reduce our carbon footprint, both inside and outside of the hospital systems. Some ways that we do this are by promoting reusable gowns, conserving supplies. Just last year, a major source of IV fluids here in the US experienced a natural disaster, causing many of our hospitals to need to conserve IV fluids. And some hospitals have also adapted flood barriers, solar systems to reduce energy usage, and even plant-based meals, which collectively have reduced emissions by 36%. So what defines our advocacy is not just our choice to have a voice, but our refusal to remain silent about the things that we stand for. The United Nations healthcare system or the United States healthcare system rather, is made up of billions and trillions of dollars. And your voice, the voice of a nurse, is worth more than every single dollar flowing through these systems. Healthcare is also ever changing, so the past that we stand on does not need to be the future that we stand for. So when we see things that need to be changed, we need to be those change makers. Government officials, mayors, politicians, presidents, it's all top of mind. It was actually election day, of course, yesterday, but their impact is limited, right? They serve terms of 2 to 4 years, and our terms as nurses are often 40 plus years, strengthening these systems and communities that we work in. So we have this unlimited lifetime subscription of protecting our patients and our communities. So how do we do that exactly? We advocate, we amplify, and we multiply. So in August of 2020, I was given the opportunity to travel to Ocala, Florida, a small area down south, to assist 11 of my colleagues in a COVID hotspot. And following this event, I had received an invitation to speak at a global nursing event that was hosted by the World Health Organization and Nursing Now Challenge, which is another really great organization if you guys haven't heard of it. I was under the impression I was representing my hospital at the event, but when I got there, we quickly saw Oprah and Kate Middleton and the Pope, and we realized that I was representing the United States of America. And our initial thought was like, oh my gosh, they invited the wrong Amy. But it was exciting. They wanted to hear from a frontline nurse. And so following this event, I was elected as co-chair of a new committee with Nursing Now, where I support around 218,000 nurses around the globe today. And then following this event and being elected into this leadership role, I heard of an opportunity to get a grant to influence low-income communities in New York City. And so I applied for that. I was able to benefit some nonprofits here in New York City. One is a foster care agency, another is a local harm reduction center. And then following that, I began speaking at these high-level nursing events and eventually at the United Nations General Assembly in 2022. At the General Assembly, I was provided with an opportunity to speak on 2 panels. So the first was to provide these politicians and CEOs a look into exactly what nurses do. On the second, I was invited to speak about my community once again and community nursing. But throughout my week and my time there at the UN, I had noticed some issues in some other countries. And my colleague, Rashid, was with me, and he's from Malawi, and they suffer disproportionately due to climate change. And they have extreme weather events like cyclones and heat waves and food scarcity and displacement, because of all of these climate issues. So I chose to use my time to reflect on those issues to see if they could gain some sort of funding or attention for the things that those nurses and community health workers needed. And after this event, it was successful. Rashid was able to get a motorbike to deliver vaccines to rural areas that don't have traditional roads within his country. Specifically those that have been demolished by natural disasters. So from that moment on, I just kind of kept speaking in every space that I was and diverting the attention to the nurses, community health workers, and making sure that they were at top of mind. I share this with you today because I think that a lot of people hear these stories. I used to hear stories like this when I was a new grad nurse and think like that's crazy and unattainable and not realistic. But it is realistic, and it's exactly what can happen when you're supported by the right people and when you're in the right room, advocating for your patients and getting involved in these organizations. So when it comes to impacting policy, storytelling is really key. People who work in the media, they do a good job writing about healthcare and about nurses, but their job is like to tell the story, right? We're the ones actually living it, and absolutely nobody is going to tell your story the way that you do. If you tell stories the way I do, which is somewhat chaotic, I would recommend taking a storytelling course. There's a lot of really good ones. There's one through People Power Health, which is a great organization run by some Harvard physicians. There's another one that the World Health Organization usually hosts in August of each year that's very helpful. So lots of different ways to become involved. You don't have to be an influencer necessarily to influence policy change. You can look into some side events at the United Nations, look into local events in your communities, and leverage social media. When it comes to sharing knowledge, of course, that is crucial. These executives in high-level positions, a lot of them want to help us, but they have no idea what nurses do and what we need, and it's our responsibility to share that. These are just a few forums that I've found to be helpful. Many of them are parallel events to the United Nations. The Commission on the Status of Women is always a really great one. Sometimes there's opportunities to submit oral statements, sometimes written statements. So these are all really great things that you can follow along with. But if you hear of any sort of event near you and you feel like a nurse needs to be in that room, please don't hesitate to go and to share your voice. This is a list of resources that I thought might be helpful for the group. If you live in close vicinity to New York or you're planning a trip, you can also take a tour at the UN and find out what kinds of different events are going on there. They've got lots of mailing lists and different things that you can do as well to keep track. So thank you guys so much. Thank you for sharing your time with me, but also thank you for all that you're about to do. I know that many of you already work as nurses, and some of you are just entering this profession at a time when it really is most challenging and most needed. The number of lives that you will change by simply showing up to work every day is immeasurable, but I'm very hopeful for the future of healthcare thanks to all of you. So thank you so much for sharing this time with me, and feel free to connect with me. I'd love to stay in touch.
Thank you, Amy, for that fantastic presentation. I always resort to you had a storytelling video of vaccines and nursing, and it's the best example of how nurses can be storytellers. I wish I had it to share a link to share with you all, but it's so fantastic. So I really appreciate you bringing that storytelling aspect into the room. I know we're a little pressed with time, so I think I'll turn it over to you, Grace, to lead us out for the rest of the webinar, but please join me again in thanking our speakers for their presentations, really inspiring examples of nursing leadership at the global level.
Yeah, great. So let's take a moment to shift from listening to reflecting. We've heard that these nurses are influencing climate policy at the highest levels and how global nursing organizations are supporting these roles, coordinating these efforts. And in this series, it's our goal to spread awareness of this and offer a community for all nurses around the world to participate either virtually or on the ground. And like our speaker said, global impact doesn't always happen at summits on the at COP, whether we're from lack of knowing that we can actually participate in something like this or facing barriers to attend, like time, money, or other things. It's that, global impact happens in exam rooms, hospitals, communities, homes. And the truth is, if you're a nurse, you're already engaging in climate action, even if you don't yet call it that. Every time that you educate a family about asthma triggers, reduce waste in your clinic, advocate for safe housing, you're advancing health and planetary well-being. And this conversation is about making that connection visible, intentional, and amplified. Because when nurses name what they're doing, when we share our stories, when we spark that change, our everyday actions, they're tied to the bigger picture, become global advocacy. So let's maybe wrap this up. I know that we're just kind of really short on time. Let's have some final notes from maybe our speakers can start the conversation, but also want to open up to audience participation. If you have something to share either in the chat or if you want to raise your hand and come off mute, you can answer these questions. Let's start with what motivates you to act on climate change. What is your personal motivation for climate change action? Erica, Amy, or anybody else?
I can go first. For me, it's quite personal. So I feel quite deeply connected to this planet and all of its species. And I laugh a little bit because I think some people aren't. And they don't feel that connection as strongly. And I've heard a lot of discourse around, oh, well, we have to save the planet and save nature. But we are nature. And I keep reminding people that over and over again. We are nature. There's not this separation of self and nature. And so humans have this incredibly strong drive to stay alive, as we know. And so I think if we were to like switch the discourse to, we are this thing and therefore we have to stay alive, and so does this thing, we would act much more swiftly and with much more decisive action. I feel a deep sense of awe when I am surrounded by, nature, and people. I also understand very deeply that in order to be healthy and have, a future, we do need this planet. And then there's that sense of the fact that these disruptions are caused by human behavior. So that is my responsibility as a human to make changes, both in my own behavior and as a nurse in human behavior around me, to address these changes. So it's that kind of like ethical duty, that deep connection, and that like protection of self and of others that comes with being a nurse that has really connected me to this. And I said at the start, I don't officially hold this portfolio at ICN any longer. My colleague Gail Ladinsky does and is doing a fantastic job doing it. But I am definitely doing this in my clinical work because I do work clinically as well, and in the background at ICN almost every day. So.
Yeah, I echo everything that Erica said. I think that, to put it simply, climate change affects everything and everyone around us. I know as like a nurse, probably like many of you, I'm constantly driven by outcomes, right? Like I love that satisfaction of seeing a long-term patient getting discharged and seeing like the impact that we've actually had on something, and knowing that climate change is something that we can impact even by just making small changes, like not bringing so many supplies into a room when we're caring for a patient, or reducing our carbon footprint. I think that that motivates me, knowing that we can actually see that difference that we're making.
Absolutely. And someone once described it to me as the earth has a fever, and who knows better to take care of a fever than a nurse? So that makes me personally feel like I'm equipped to be able to address climate change and call what I could do every day in my practice, no matter what my setting is, no matter what level I'm practicing at, to be able to be empowered to know that I'm actually taking small steps towards it, and that collectively we're all making a bigger impact. So I just want to open up to the rest of the room. Maybe I'll take like 2, 3 more minutes to discuss who in the room feels like what you do every day is contributing to global climate change. And can you give us an example of something in your practice or your organization that's just one piece of this collective puzzle?
I'll mention something. So I work in a peri-op environment in New York as well. And obviously there's a lot of waste in the peri-op environment. A lot of it's for really good reasons, infection control, sterilization. But I have noticed when I've worked with surgeons who come from other countries, they see places where we kind of waste things here. And I think that's really interesting. Like, for example, when we drape patients, here where I've worked, we use a lot of disposable drapes. In other countries, I think they've really honed in on opportunities to use reusable drapes, which is just like one small thing. But I think I've become a lot more sensitive just like over the last 10 years of being a nurse to like how much we throw out. And, I know there's not a lot of easy solutions, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for innovation, which really interests me a lot. So I think that's what drives me. It's just the fact that, I think that we could come up with solutions, and like who better than nurses who are, using these things every day and are frontline and kind of like seeing like the full impact of, the full trash can at the end of a surgical case.
Absolutely. Who else wants to share? I'm putting some other prompts in the chat too to get you kind of thinking. And this can be something that you respond to now, or also something that you think about in your own daily practice over the next couple of months as you attend more of these webinar sessions. Ways to get, if you're not already thinking about it, how you are one piece of this puzzle and how you are contributing, and how together we actually have a movement that's growing with nurses leading the charge on climate change. Any last takers?
If I could just comment quickly on what Sarah said, I really like just the idea of like, I think we do a lot of things without thinking about them, just because that's what we're used to. That's the culture. And, we use a giant drape or 10 giant drapes just because that's what we're doing. Whereas someone in a country that might not have those resources are used to thinking about how to use that. And so if we were to shift only just a little bit to thinking about this, like, okay, hold on, let me pause. And I think that nurses in clinical settings can make that change and can say, well, I'm going to look at, drapes, and then spread that across the setting, interdisciplinary, like to other, to surgeons and to physicians and managers and everything, to say, well, here's what I've noticed, and maybe we can make this small change in this area, and just to get people thinking about it, because there's like a million things to think about right now. And so how many drapes you toss across a room might not be top of mind, but if we have one person take that leadership, then I think it will have that ripple effect.
Exactly. That's right. And it's just a mindful practice, right?
Mhm.
So as we close out here, just think about this. What you do matters, and how you tell that story matters just as much. Later this year, we're going to launch a digital campaign to showcase the powerful, diverse ways that all of us as nurses are already leading the change on climate and health, whether from the bedside, classroom, boardroom, or beyond. And so think about, what part of your story would you share? Think about how to turn that into a 30-second video where you can share how you're contributing to this global movement. And we'll actually have a launch for that campaign on social media later on, as we get closer to the COP conference in Belém in Brazil in November. So keep that at front of mind, and share it with your friends, share these prompts with your friends, talk about this in your setting. And we hope to see you next month in July. Kara, do you want to share information about getting set up for the July session?
Yes, so the July session, Erica had mentioned about their collaboration with Global and Climate and Health Alliance. Annie also collaborates with them as well. And so we've invited a speaker from their organization to come share a little bit about the context of what the broader health community is calling in the lead up to COP. So there's been some organizing happening already, and this is global health collaboration. And so we're thrilled to have a speaker, Jess Beagley from their team, talk to us about what they've been working on and what they're hoping to see in terms of outcomes and decisions from the webinars, and from COP. And I'll pop the registration link in the chat here for you all. We'd love to have you join us. It'll be on July 23rd at the same time. So that's noon Eastern time. And for folks that are on the East Coast in the US, but I'll let you all convert that to your time zone. But we'd love to have you join us. And thank you again to our speakers. Thrilled to have this conversation.
Thanks, everyone. Stay cool.